Poems to a Listener, readings and conversation with contemporary poets.
We are the junction. The body is the herb. The mind is the honey. The heart is the undifferentiated. The mind touches the body and is the sun. The mind touches the heart and is the music. When body touches heart, they together are the moon in the silently falling snow over there. Which is truth exceeding, is the residence, the sanctified, is the secret closet, and passes into glory.
Welcome. I'm Henry Lyman, and in this half-hour program, we'll be visiting with poet Jack Gilbert and listening to poems from his book, The Great Fires, published by Knopf. He began by talking about poetry in relation to the poem we just heard.
What interests me is to try to think as a poem thinks, and think through the image, through the concrete particular, through the metaphor.
In the poem you say, when body touches heart, they together are the moon in the silently falling snow over there. So the heart, the body becoming one undifferentiated thing, then conjoins with what is being seen.
Over there is an attempt suddenly to leverage the reader from the idea to an awareness of sensory existence. Suddenly realize it's snow. It's not the abstract word snow,
Right.
but off in the corner of your eye or out that window, there's actual snow falling.
Right. The term, the phrase over there locates it suddenly, makes it real. Nevertheless, the speaker is still becoming it.
I think that's true.
And that's the juncture.
Or trying to experience what it is he's saying. And not just telling the poem what it should believe, but listening to the poem, listening to what's being said, listening to the overtones of when you put those two images together. You and the poem are dancing together. It's not always you leading. Sometimes the poem is leading. I like dancing with somebody. Fourth meditation, highlights and interstices. How little we keep from our lives after childhood, and mostly the uncommon. Out of all our sleep, only the bizarre. We think of our lifetime mostly as the exceptional and sorrow. Remember beginnings of love and the pain later on. But little between stays with us. Marriage we usually remember as the children, vacations and sickness, the exceptions. Why can't we keep the ordinary? So much of the best is when nothing was happening. Most of the good days are lived the way a mother picks up the child without noticing and carries her across Waller Street while talking with the other woman. What if she could keep all of that? Our real lives happen in between the memorable. Pear trees usually are not in blossom, and seldom does the autumn morning have the smell of first snow. Most of the time it is only July, filled with green leaves, just the undifferentiated blessing, which always gets lost. I have mislaid 2,000 similar breakfasts with Michiko. What I miss most about her is what I can't remember.
Who was Michiko?
I've been in love 3 times in my life, and one of them was Michiko. We were together for 11 years. And she died unexpectedly 10 years ago. We didn't know she was in danger. We knew she was a little sick. She thought she had her stomach upset. And finally I got worried, and I picked her up to take her to the hospital, and her heart stopped.
What you miss most of her is what you can't remember, the poem says. The mislaid breakfasts, the 1,000, 2,000 mislaid breakfasts.
Mm-hmm. It's easy to remember the highlights, as it says in the title. But life and marriage and love is in the interstices, those parts between the highlights.
What you call the undifferentiated blessing?
It's a condition of being rather than peaks. Blake says, if we could only have the gates of perception cleansed, paradise would be now. We are living in paradise now. You know, the first time you go to bed with somebody, or the first 6 months of courtship and such, are just wonderful with their intensity. But I like after that. I like when it's normal of absolute top quality. Getting old. The soft wind comes sweet in the night on the mountain, invisible except for the sound it makes in the big poplars outside and the feel on his naked single body, which breathes quietly a little before dawn, eyes open and in love with the table and chair in the transparent dark and stars in the other window. Soon it will be time for the first tea and cool pear, and then the 10 miles down and up the mountain. Old and alone, he thinks, smiling, missing her, and knowing the future is shortening. He can hear the faint water and the birds beginning, full of what abundance has done to his spirit, feeling around inside to see if his heart is still, thank God, ambitious, the way old men look in their eyes each morning or feel their back, knowing she isn't there and how much Michiko isn't anywhere. The eyes close as he remembers seeing the big owl on the roof last night for the first time after hearing it for months, thinking how much he has grown unsuited for love the size it is for him. But maybe not, he says, and the eyes open as he grins at the heart's stubborn pretending.
This man is very solitary.
Yes.
Just there, feeling the wind on his body and observing...
On his naked
body, and observing it.
And a body that's alone. There's nobody in bed with him.
Single body. In love, in a way, with the objects around him, the chair, the table.
With the earth, with the world, with himself.
In love with a memory, too. The memory of the 2 women. The one who...
He's rich with that, but you know, I'd like to think, to the extent it is me, I love living in solitude.
Well, there's a richness.
Well, one of the things it is, you learn how to eat. You learn how to feast on your life. But I like this poem. I have very great tenderness toward this person. And that's why the ending. He knows that he's...
pretending, in a way. Stubbornly.
Trying to convince themselves, yeah, it's going to be okay. You're going to fall in love again. It'll just give it time, etc. It's not going to happen again, probably. Could happen, but it's like the odds are, you're not going to have another Michiko. Doesn't happen that often. But it's funny, it's fun. The sweetness he has toward his own heart telling itself sweet lies. Resume. Easter goat on the mountain. The goat roasted with lemon, hot pepper, and thyme. Hacking off the meat, getting out the last handfuls from the spine. Grease all the way to his elbows, his face oily and his heart blooming. The others full now, and watching his lust with surprise. The German telling the Greeks that he would know and calling the man over. What, they asked him, was the difference between angels and devils? He told them quickly and set off for his hut down in the empty valley, where he would wash in cold water and kerosene light, happy and lonely. The hot day was softening as he made his way down the trails, down from that kind of energy to the silence of his real life, to what years were left. Not to the fire, not to the ice, to flesh of the spirit and soul of the body, to the clearness of a future lived inch by inch, rock by green barley and barley ripe, by basil and dove tower and white doves turning in the bright sky, crowded with the sweet ghosts of what had been, surrounded by himself, tomato by tomato, canned fish for stew, sitting outside on the wall of the vineyard with hot tea as night rises from the parched earth and the sea darkens in the distance. Insistent stars and hymn-singing popular songs amid the quiet. Each dawn pulling the day's supply of water from his deep well, then drinking hot soup while watching the sunrise. That is the other room. This is the broken Aphrodite on her small throne, and those are the books. These are photographs of the two women. All of it the life of a man who went astray a long time ago.
At the beginning of the poem, we see this man devouring a goat, gorging on life, as it were, all the way down to the spine. Then he's asked the question, what's the difference between angels and devils?
The devil likes human life, and angels have no way of liking human life because they can't experience it. The only way that you can explain how much the devil lets you get away with, how much happiness he lets you have, is the devil is on our side. His job description means he has to hurt us, has to give us cancer or destroy the marriage and all these things. But he keeps delaying. And during the delay, we have all this wonderful stuff of being alive. Eventually he has to ruin us. But he wants to be human. He wants to experience what we have. It's a hell of a lot better life than the angels have.
It's rather dry, dull, to say the least. But
Well, it's kind of like visiting your parents in your best suit. They're always standing up there in heaven, gathered in their hierarchies of the dominions and all the rest of them. And if you ever see the pictures of heaven, there are very few pictures of heaven. And when they are, they're all formal. It's like a reunion, some Sunday. They've all got their best clothes on. It's damask with jewels on, and everybody is according to their ranking.
But the devil is someone we can identify with.
Devil lives with us. Guilty. The old man certainly looked guilty. Ugly, ragged, and not clean. Not to mention their finding him there in the woods with her body. Neighbors told how he was always playing with dead squirrels, mangled dogs, and even snakes. He said those were the only things that would allow him to get close. Look at me, the old man said with uncomplaining simplicity. I'm already one of the dead among the dead. And it is hard to see the things humiliated the way death does it. Possums smeared on the road, birds with ants eating out their eyes, cats in the gutter with the bellies full of maggots. Even dying rats want privacy for their disgrace. It's true I washed the dirt off her face and blood from the body, and combed her hair. I did sleep beside her, at her feet for 2 days like my dog used to. I got the dress back on the best I could. She looked so neglected, like garbage thrown in the weeds, like nobody cared because he had done that to her. I kept thinking how long she is going to be alone now. I knew the police would take pictures and put them in the papers naked and open so people could look at her while eating their breakfast. I wanted to give her spirit time to get ready.
The old man who has come upon this woman and stayed with the body, he says the dead things were the only things that ever allowed him to get close.
He doesn't expect people not to look at him as something repugnant, who will cross the street to get away from him if they see him coming. They don't even know him, but they see this old ragged man coming. Very often they cross the street. So that he doesn't live with the dead bodies. It just happened he came across one in the woods.
And he protects her. He dresses her up again. He puts her clothes back on, combs her hair, adjusts her.
Protects her dignity, protects her appearance. He doesn't want someone to see her. It's bad enough that this horrible thing has been done to her, the rape and the murder. But beyond that, she's going to be violated.
By the newspapers, by the
newspaper, by people looking at her and seeing her filthy, and her hair dirty, and her body showing, and all stuff like that. And he wants to at least try to protect her very minimal level of decency. It's a poem about tenderness for me, but also about that kind of person who understands what it's like not to have even the minimal level of acceptability. It's kind of a love poem in a way.
Tenderness,
but love for the broken of the earth. Meanwhile, it waits. While I am walking through the pine trees by the river, it is waiting. It has waited a long time. In southern France, in Belgium, and even Alabama. Now it waits in New England while I say grace over almost everything. For a possum dead on someone's lawn, the single light on a levee while Northampton sleeps, and because the lanes between houses in Greek hamlets are exactly the width of a donkey loaded on each side with barley. Loneliness is the mother's milk of America. The heart is a foreign country whose language none of us is good at. Winter lingers on in the woods, but already it looks discarded as the birds return and sing carelessly, as though there never was the power and size of December. For 9 years in me it has wanted. My life is pleasant as usual. My body is a blessing and my spirit clear, but the waiting does not let up.
You say grace over almost everything, the poem says. Grace over these things that normally would be unnoticed, like that man in the last poem.
I guess the original thing was from something I read many years ago, an essay by Charles Lamb, in which he said, we shouldn't say grace just over food. We should say grace over Shakespeare.
Or if you're going to say grace over Shakespeare, you could say grace over a possum, too.
Right. Well, that's what I chose to do with it.
This man, despite the fact that he's able to say grace over almost everything, is nevertheless quite lonely. Something in him is waiting, wanting. Something in you. I mean, you're speaking from the first person here. I.
We're miracles, and there's this sense of something really important could happen. A hovering something, and you don't know what it is. Life is okay. It's even very lucky. But as though you had a destiny and don't know what the destiny is. And it's waiting, and you don't get there, and it's waiting, and you don't get there. Decade after decade. Part of the wanting, there's a point in the poem where it talks about for 9 years of waiting. Michiko had been dead for 9 years when I wrote the poem. And what I was really waiting for was to see if I would ever fall in love again. Finding something. I try to name it, but can't, and end up saying, moon is horses in the tempered dark, because horses is the closest I can get to its name. I sit on the terrace of this villa the king's telegrapher built on the mountain, which looks down on a blue sea and the small white ferry crossing slowly to the next island each noon. Michiko is dying in the house behind me, with the long windows open, so I can hear the faint sound she will make when she wants watermelon to suck, or so I can take her to a bucket in the corner of the high-ceilinged room, which is the best we can do for a chamber pot. She will lean against my leg as she sits, so as not to fall over in her weakness. How strange and fine to get so near to it. The arches of her feet are like voices of children calling in a grove of lemon trees, where my heart is as helpless as crushed birds.
Something was found in her dying?
You know, so often, even when we're married and married for years, there's a kind of politeness between us, courtesy, decorum, a privacy. And you have somebody who you've washed, you've cleaned up after, you've emptied out the chamber pot for and examined what's there to try to determine what's wrong with her, whether she's getting better and such. You cross a border into a remarkable knowing of another human being. And that's what this poem really was about. That and that we have no language for it, even though we've been there and we know about it.
And there's also this sense of helplessness that comes with it. Your heart being as helpless as crushed birds.
Right.
I mean, you do what you can, as best you can, and you may be quite effective.
Right.
But simultaneously, you're like an open wound and helpless.
But even that helplessness, as awful as it is, makes you, I think, extraordinarily aware of yourself, your limitations, the limitations of love.
And the limitations of life.
Of life and the unyieldingness of death. No matter how good you are, death won't yield a quarter of an inch. Measuring the tiger. Barrels of chains, sides of beef stacked in vans, water buffalo dragging logs of teak through mud outside Mandalay, Pantocrator in the Byzantine dome, the mammoth overhead crane bringing slabs of steel through the dingy light and roar to the giant shear which cuts the adamantine 3/4-inch plates, and they flop down. The weight of the mind fractures the girders and piers of my spirit, spilling out the heart's melt. Incandescent ingots big as cars trundling out of the Titanic mills, red slag scaling off the brighter metal in the dark. The Monongahela River below, night's sheen on its belly, silence except for the machinery clanging deeper in me. You will love again, people say. Give it time. Me with time running out. Day after day of the everyday. What they call real life made of 1/8 of an inch gauge. Irony pretending to be important. Neatness and rhyme pretending to be poetry. Fucking instead of passion. Newness strutting around as if it were significant. I want to go back to that time after Michiko's death when I wept every day among the trees for 2 years. The magnitude of the pain of being that much alive.
The mind threatens to break under its own weight, almost. And at the same time, the mind is seen in terms of industry, steel mills, Pittsburgh.
Certainly Pittsburgh.
You grew up there?
Yes. And I used to work in the mills. But the poem is about trying to find equivalents for size. We live among such smallness, such inconsequentialness. That's why the tiger in the title is spelled Tyger.
Right, like
Blake's tiger. And I was trying to find equivalents for that thing we are, that thing we sometimes are, that we can be. I don't know if you know what 1/8 of an inch gauge means.
No.
1/8 of an inch gauge is not much of a life. But you get some giant mill or shear that will shear 3/4 inch steel. That's big. That's a powerful machine. And it's like the rivers out there, the Monongahela and the Allegheny forming the Ohio. In Pittsburgh, you live with those giant rivers all the time. And when I was a kid, the alleys we played hide and seek in were pink because the skies hundreds of feet high were full of flames from the Bessemer converters along those rivers. And that's what the thing is about.
But it's also about breaking, isn't it? I mean, the mind is breaking itself as it becomes the furnace, the smelter. It pours out its own heat.
So what?
It's melt.
You're going to die anyhow. Why not go out for something that's really worth it? It's like, I always thought that the nicest way to die would be being ripped apart by a tiger. I'm going to die anyhow. I don't want to be eaten by mice.
So ripped apart by Blake's tiger, in this case.
Yeah. It's going to happen. But I really would like to be stretched. I would like to have an idea of how large things are, even at the cost. And at the end, the sorrow about Michiko's death, sure it hurt. But boy, it was a pain that mattered. It was on the size that mattered for people who are miraculous. And we're all miraculous if we can just find out our own scale.
We've been visiting with poet Jack Gilbert and listening to poems from his book, The Great Fires, published by Knopf. I'm Henry Lyman. Thanks for joining us.
Poems to a Listener was produced by Henry Lyman in cooperation with WFCR, Amherst, Massachusetts. This program was supported by the Witter Binner Foundation for Poetry and the National Endowment for the Arts.